Hi everyone and welcome back. So today we're going to be doing the next installment of Cactus Chat. So I'm going to do a little bit of a change to the format that I usually use. Before it was basically just me sitting in front of the camera and answering all of your questions. However, what I noticed was that the audio wasn't the best, and that's because my camera wasn't the best. So rather than you having to look at my mug for the possible 20 minutes or half an hour that this video is going to go for, I'll put up some nice pictures and you can listen away. Now, just before we get into the questions, just one thing that I did want to mention is that I have actually started a Patreon page. And if you're not familiar with Patreon, basically what it is a way for artists, YouTube creators, musicians, that sort of thing, to receive funding from their fans. So if you're wanting to support the channel, you can head on over to Patreon, and I'll be putting up the link throughout the video. A few benefits of supporting me on Patreon is that going forward from here, all new video releases will be available for my Patreons first, and then at a later date will become available to everybody else across YouTube. There is also a message board which looks very similar to Facebook, so you'll be able to interact with me on there as well. Now there's a few different tier levels, so it's not as if you have to go ahead and spend hundreds of dollars or anything like that. To become a Patreon of mine starts at $1, and it's a monthly recurring charge, and then it goes up from there. But will be Patreon exclusive content as well, so things that I will not be releasing on YouTube. But my sort of standard videos and what I have been doing up until now will absolutely be available to everybody. But just in order to show my appreciation for those that are supporting me, there will be exclusive content over on Patreon. Now, without further ado, we shall get into the questions. So Kryptonite Whale has asked, how long after repotting do you wait to water? That honestly does depend on a few different factors. The first being is what type of cactus that it is. If it's a rot-prone cactus, so something like an Astrophytum, Erioces, Lophophora, those sorts of things, the more sensitive ones, I'll wait anywhere from 10 days up to a month, and also depending on the season. So if it's winter or not the growing season, so late autumn, early winter, full winter, then I will not water at all until till the growing season kicks in again. And then the other factor is whether I have to disturb the roots very much. Now, the way that I repot cactus, 9 times out of 10, what I will actually do is I will use a little dustpan brush, and I will actually sweep off all of the old soil off the roots until they're nice and clean, which does disturb the roots quite a bit. So if it's a fairly easygoing cactus, Gymnocalycium, Echinopsis, Labivia, those sorts of things, the really hardy ones, I might wait a week or two. But again, if I'm repotting in winter, which I do like to do, because the plant's sleeping and then it can just, the roots will just heal over slowly, then I just don't water at all. Next question is from Karen Kneebone, and Karen has asked, and this was in relation to my cactus pest management video, and the product that I use, which is Bug Killer by Rich Grow. And Karen has asked, just wondering if this product impacts bees on the flowers. And Karen said that she's been using Confidor on her succulents successfully. However, she takes the flowers off to ensure the good bugs are not harmed. Now, I actually read some pretty disturbing information on the active ingredient in bug killer, which is imidacloprid. If I'm pronouncing that right again, I'm going to pop it up on the screen. There was a study that came out of, I think it was Europe, that actually had very, very strong evidence to suggest that imidacloprid, which is a systemic pesticide, and from memory, sourced through from nicotine, so it's a nicotine derivative, that it does actually directly contribute towards colony collapse, which is a massive, massive global problem at the moment. A lot of people don't actually realise how much of an impact bees have on our food supply. They're very underappreciated, and they do so much to make sure that we can actually eat. So colony collapse amongst bees is basically, as the name suggests, it's where the colony just implodes. It stops functioning. The bees don't do what they're supposed to do, and they basically just die. So the active ingredient in bug killer, and look, a lot of other pesticides, there's countless pesticides that have imidacloprid as their main ingredient, has been directly linked to that. Now, I'm not going to get too political in this or anything like that, but I will say that agricultural companies, especially the larger ones, do have a nasty habit of denying claims like this and trying to disprove the studies. They've done it for many, many years, and it's often well and truly after the bulk of the damage is done that they actually admit, oh, hang on a minute, yeah, no, this product isn't any good. So, where does that leave me? I actually am in the process of looking for an alternative, because I don't want to do anything that's, going to be harmful to the environment. Well, I try and do the best that I can. So if I do find something else that's beneficial and will work to the same degree, I'll jump onto it. But I have tried so many systemic pesticides, and I just haven't had the successes I have had with the ones that have got the active ingredient of imidacloprid. So it's on the drawing board. I do only use the product once a year, but still, if the bees are coming into the garden and picking that up and it's impacting or damaging them, that's not something that I really want to be doing. So once I find something else, I'll definitely be letting you guys know. So yeah, not the best outcome for that one, but great question. I really like that one. Alrighty, so Colin Murray has asked, can I talk a little bit about my climate and how I house my plants throughout the seasons? Do I keep them inside in winter or outside year round? So I'm in Melbourne, Australia, and as you'll probably all know by now, now my area, or Melbourne, is known to have 4 seasons in one day, and quite honestly, it's a bit of a joke, but it's an ongoing joke, but it is actually true as well. Our weather does change very, very rapidly. So, for example, yesterday it was about 35, 36 degrees, and you can probably hear the rain now. It's absolutely bucketing down. So, but that can happen in a day. So, overall, though, looking at it broadly, my climate is considered to be fairly mild. We don't get snow. We very rarely get frost, maybe a couple of times a year. Our summers are very hot and dry. We have a very dry wind, so we have fairly low humidity. In terms of how I house my plants throughout the season, I don't bring any plants inside over winter at all. They all stay outside. Now my plants, as you will have seen, are up against the house walls, and there's a sort of where the roof comes out a bit, so the eaves, they sit under there. What I actually do, however, is that I move all of the very rot-prone ones to the lower shelves and right at the back, which is pretty much going to be in darkness, but they're asleep by then anyways. because sometimes the rain will actually get onto them. And for me, it's more about preparation. So I'll stop watering most plants early autumn, and then try and get them to dry out before the cold really sets in. And then for the rot-prone ones, when I wake them up again at the next season, I do a very slow introduction of water, so it might only be 15 or 20 mils of water, which isn't a lot for a pot, and then I wait until they sort of all kick-start going again. But I do garden outside, and that is up until I get my greenhouse. So fingers crossed that Patreon goes well, and I can go ahead and get a greenhouse, and that'll extend my growing season quite dramatically. Following on from that question, we've got one from Alexander KTN, and they've asked, how cold does it get where I live, and do we get frosts? It does get pretty cold here. Very rarely does it get into the minus temperatures. Now in Australia we use Celsius, and I don't know how to convert to Fahrenheit. But on some winter days we'll get into the single digits, so just a couple of degrees. And that's usually early morning. In winter it'll usually warm up to around maybe 10, between 10 and 15 degrees, and it can stay like that. We do get frosts, but just not very often, and they're not usually too bad anyways. But it does change, but yeah, not super cold. We don't get snow. Now we've got a question from YS Hood, and they've asked, can I ask how you learned all that you know? Do you have formal training, or did you just learn on the go? Alrighty, so to start from the start, I do have a certificate in horticulture. I got that many years ago, and it was just sort of a basic entry level certificate, but basically just gave me a basic understanding of NPK, which is the fertilizers and things like that, and just basic plant knowledge. Most of what I know is I've learned on the go and through trial and error. I think probably the most valuable resource that I've come across is forums, because it gives you a chance to connect with people within your area who have the same climate as you. So depending on your climate, it's going to change so much how you actually look after a plant and how you manage everything. So I really can't recommend forums enough. I haven't found books overly informative. I find a lot of the information incredibly generic, and a lot of the time, to be honest, counterproductive. They all seem to follow very similar principles without any regard for how the plant actually grows in the wild, what its requirements are, and things like that. They have a very basic approach to soil mix and structure and things like that. So I'm not a real advocate for cactus books. I mean, they're good to have a look at the pictures and whatnot, but I don't know. I guess if you're in the library next time, grab 2 or 3 cactus books, flick them all open to the bit where they tell you about soil, and have a look. They'll all pretty much be identical, which is, put in some organic matter and some gravel, and that's it. That'll serve every cactus. Sorry, but it doesn't. So I'm not a big fan of cactus books. The other way that I know what I know is, or some of what I know, is that I do actually work at a wholesale production nursery that does grow cactus and succulents. So I do have a, sort of I guess you call it a intermediate understanding of wholesale production of plants. So that's the other thing. A couple of other resources that I use, and I'll pop these up on the screen. For identification, I use cactusart.biz, it hasn't got everything, but it's a really, really good starting point. And it's gives you, I use it more so to locate plants that I'm after, and then I can go and try and find them after that. The other one is an online publication which is available, I think, in English, French, and Czech, possibly, which is called Xerophilia. It is a free publication. How it's free, I don't know, because it is so well put together, and an absolutely incredible publication. And it's also what I base a lot of my, there's a particular article or episode that I base the way that I approach, for the most part, soil mixes and things like that. So if you do check it out, and I'll put the link up on the screen, I would recommend looking for the edition or article that's entitled Stone Eaters. It's quite a long episode or article. I think it's about 100 pages, but I can't recommend it enough. Since reading that, my plants and their strength and things like that have increased beyond measure. So I definitely recommend checking that out. I believe it's one of the earlier editions. But that's pretty much how I know what I know. My biggest recommendation, and I've said this numerous times now, is to jump on the forums and connect with other people. But just remember that everybody's going to have a different approach. So you just need to sort of work out what's going to work for you and be most successful. Okay, next one we've got from Normand Goupel. And he said, I wish you would share more information about where you purchase your cactus, especially Astrophytum. Okay, I'd very much like to share where I buy my cactus from. However, and I have mentioned this in the last Cactus Chat installment, that I purchase my plants predominantly from home growers, so independent people who don't have businesses or anything like that. Now, the best way that I can explain why I don't share where I buy my plants from is because I myself sell plants from time to time, and it would be like if I was to sell plants to somebody and for them to then put all of my information onto a YouTube video or into a public arena. I can tell you now I wouldn't be too happy about that. So where I buy my plants from are people that I've connected with over the years, and I certainly can't go putting out people's personal information on the internet. That would not be a very good thing to do. So in terms of seed and businesses that I use, absolutely, I'm going to pop those up on the screen. There's two places that I buy seed from, both of which I would recommend highly. The first is cactusstore.com. They're based in Arizona, America, or USA, and they've got an excellent selection, and they're extremely well priced. There's another one that I use, which is Coera's, and I've mentioned these before, but just in case you didn't see the first episode of Cactus Chat, the second one is Coera's, who have a mind-blowing catalogue. Now, in terms of the two stores, I have had better success, I would say, overall with Cactus Store, in terms of germination and things like that. Coera's, I did have a little bit of trouble with some Gymnocalycium seed that I bought. I bought, I think around 20 packets or so, like something like that, and I only got around 40% of those, so what's that, 8 packets that actually germinated. Now, that happens, it can happen, it could have been something that I did, but to me, the seed did not look ripe. I think it was picked too early, but that's the only thing I can say, that's not great about them. But both sites, the seed is always perfectly clean, there's no bits of debris or anything like that. So that's a good place. But in terms of purchasing actual plants, you're going to need to check out your local garden centres. But honestly, I would recommend, again, checking out the forums and connecting with other growers, because what you're going to find is that private growers are going to have some more of the more unusual stuff if that's what you're looking for. And quite honestly, in a shop, for your direct question about Astrophytum, you're only going to find the basic ones. You are not going to find, it's extremely unlikely that you'll find anything other than the core group of Astrophytums, which is your Astrophytum mysterias, Myriostigma, Capricorn, and that's pretty much that's it. That's all you're really going to find. You're not going to find any of the hybrids or anything like that. All right, moving on. Harry Yakub has asked, do I have fewer cactus than before? Yes, absolutely. I have quite a lot less than I did have before. Now, I hinted at this, I believe it was at the end of, what are we in now? 2018. At the end of 2016, I did my winter tour or autumn tour. And I did say that I would be clearing out a lot of cactus, which I did, so I sold off a lot. And that is because my cactus collection is taking a new turn. So I have said it a couple of times now that I'm going to be moving more into specialising in a few different types of cactus. Astrophytum will be the key one that I grow, and then a few others. So Astrophytum, Gymnocalycium, Lophophora, and Erioses will be the four main families that I focus on. I will keep a number of other plants because I like their flowers, so things like Echinopsis and Lobivia. But I need to make room so that I can specialise in what I want to specialise in. So I sold off over the last 18 months, up to 2 years, probably around 100, maybe 100 plants. And I've also gifted a lot as well. So you will still see plants other than the main ones that I'm growing come through in the tours and things like that, because I will continue to propagate plants to sell. I've propagated and sold plants since I was, my goodness, probably about 12 years old. I used to propagate cuttings and sell them to a local nursery, so that's many, many years ago. And it's something that I've always done, so I've always propagated and sold plants, and I'll continue to do so. And I'll, obviously share what I'm growing with you, and I'll still continue to plant things that aren't in the core groups that I'm growing from seed, and grow them up. So my channel will remain quite broad, but the plants that will actually be staying long term, that will reduce. Okay, now, next one is from Lys, Lyse, and they've asked, I always thought the chances are the cheap mix, referring to a potting mix, could have some pests in it. Am I wrong? No, absolutely not. You're not wrong at all. I think the thing to understand about soil, whether it's potting soil or soil out of the ground, dirt, whatever you want to call it, is that I think a lot of people consider soil to be an inert substance, being that it's just dirt, it doesn't really do anything. There's actually more life underneath the ground than there is above it. Soil is absolutely alive. And so it needs to be viewed as almost a living organism because of the amount of bacteria and fungi and all sorts of things that are in there. So cheap potting soil will absolutely have, I guess you could call them pests. I don't know whether I would call them pests as much as I would call them organisms, because not all of them are harmful. In terms of whether a cheap potting mix or an expensive one is more likely to have negative organisms in it, I'll call them negative organisms, I really don't think that there's going to be much of a difference. Now, I use the cheap potting mix for the main reason that I do this is because all I'm looking for is some organic matter to add to my cactus mixture. I don't want wetting agents, I don't want those water retention crystals, and I definitely don't want fertilizer. I like to be able to control the fertilizer that I use on my cactus, and if it's already in the potting soil, I don't know what the ratios are, I don't know what the strength is, and I can't control that. The cheaper the mix, the less it's going to have in it in terms of those additives that I'm not after. Now, I do get quite a lot of comments, and a lot of people seem very concerned about the fact that I do use very cheap potting soil. I'll just say this, and that is that the potting soil or potting mix that in my mixes, in all honesty, is the absolute least important, in my opinion. It's the least important ingredient. What's more important to me in the mix is the type of gravel that I'm using, and I like to try and use a mix of gravel. And if we to go back to an earlier question, and I mentioned the addition of xerophilia with the episode or article on the stone eaters, I think if you're to read that, and I highly recommend that you do, you'll have a much better understanding of why I'm more interested in making sure that I've got a good mixture of rock in my soil than high-grade potting soil. It's a bit too in-depth for me to go into in the Q&A, so I'll leave it there, and I might do a separate video on that. But just going back again, just quickly, with the cheap mix versus the expensive one, the chances of there being a rogue organism in either bag is relatively low due to the treatment and processing of commercial grade or commercial potting soil. So I really don't, I've said it before, I don't see the benefit in buying the more expensive one, not for growing cactus anyways. Okay, Quick Tips has asked, can you confirm the source from where you got your seeds, and also can you update on your germination rate? I'll pop the names of the two places that I buy from up again. Now, I believe that this was in relation to the Astrophytum seed haul video. So germination rate, now I don't record anything like that. I'm a little bit more of a relaxed approach, and I don't really like keeping records or getting too carried away with that. But just as a guesstimate, I would say that from the Carrera's seed for the Astrophytum seed that I bought, and that was all Japanese hybrids, the germination rate was exceptionally high, especially for the hybrids that they were. So I would say overall we're probably looking at around 70%, sometimes up to 90% germination rate for those seeds, which was great. What I did find, however, was that there was later on, when we were sort of approaching the 2-month mark of when they'd been growing, was a very, very high mortality rate, which is absolutely to be expected when you're dealing with such hybridized plants, especially Astrophytum. As generally speaking, the more hybridized the Astrophytum is, the more likely it is to rot or have weak genes, which means that it terminates quite quickly. So I grafted pretty much all of them as quickly as I could because they just started dying. I mentioned earlier the Gymnocalycium that I got, very, very poor, very, very poor germination rate. However, what did germinate has survived very well, which I would expect from Gymnocalycium. So overall this season, the germination rates have been good. They would have been excellent had the Gymnocalycium didn't bring it down, bring the overall score down, but I don't keep records or anything like that, so I can't give you definitive figures. Moving on from there, question from Primal has asked, on average, how long does it take to use, say, a 6-inch cutting, let it grow roots and grow a couple more inches? that's a very, very, very difficult question to answer with any level of certainty, because it does obviously come down to climate, time of year, and things like that. So to give you an example, last growing season, I was cutting off tons and tons of Trichoceros pachinoi and having them grow roots into the soil and then being recut for another cutting a couple of months later. This year has been absolutely dreadful. My worst season for propagating Trichoceros. Just absolutely terrible. I just cannot get them to grow roots at all. I don't know what's going on. So it's going to depend on a number of factors. But I would say if you've got a 6-inch cutting, you allow sort of 3 to 4 weeks for the base to callus out, and then if all going right, another 4 to 6 weeks for root development, and then from there, depending on the growth rate of the cactus, water levels and things like that, and temperature, you could be looking at a couple of months for it to grow a few more inches. So all in all, you're probably looking at around a 3 to 6 month process. Scripted Books has asked, you say you get your cactus seeds from overseas. Was there any quarantine issues or conditions you had to come across? They live in Australia too and are concerned about biosecurity laws. Okie dokie. Now, yes, Australia does have exceptionally strict biosecurity laws, and with good reason. We've got a beautiful country with lots of nice plants and trees and everything like that, and pests and bugs can very rapidly destroy that, as well as our agriculture industry, which is quite big as well. So a couple of things to consider when you're importing seed from overseas. The first being is that yes, it is perfectly legal to import cactus seeds from overseas. The conditions of that, however, are that the actual species must be allowed within the country. As an example, Opuntia or prickly pear, none of them are allowed at all, because they have the capacity to become a weed very, very quickly. Things like Lophophora are not allowed. Now, they have been classified as a weed, which is, in my opinion, a rather lazy approach from the government. Lophophora does not, in any state, territory of Australia, it does not have the capacity to become a weed. It is far too slow growing and far too specific in its climate requirements to become a weed. The reason that it has been banned is because of the psychoactive component of it, and that is that it's got, I think it's mescaline or something like that in it, which is something that some people use to, get high, I guess you could say. So that's not allowed either. You can actually go on and check what species and varieties are allowed, although because it's a government website, the website is quite honestly rubbish and very, very difficult to use. But check it out and just check that it's what you're importing is allowed. Keeping in mind, and this is something that you won't be able to search for directly, is say for instance I wanted to import Astrophytum myriostigma fukiuri, which is a Japanese hybrid. That will not come up, Astrophytum myriostigma fukiuri. However, Astrophytum myriostigma will come up, and if that is allowed into the country, which is considered to be the top tier of the plant, I guess you could say, any and all hybrids coming down from that will be allowed in the country, because the main or top tier plant is allowed in the country. So if it's Astrophytum myriostigma and there's anything else after it, it's allowed. The other thing that I would always say is to make sure that the seed you're importing is clearly labelled with exactly what it is. If quarantine do open the packet and there's just random seed in there, it will be destroyed. Also, if they open and check the packets, make sure that where you're getting your seed from cleans it properly. If there is any plant debris or anything like that, little bits of petal or pollen, things like that, it will be denied entry and the seed will be destroyed. I've had lots and lots of seed packages checked, and all of mine have passed quarantine, and you get a little card saying we've checked your shipment and yes, everything's okay, and then it'll come through. It will delay your postage by anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks depending on how busy they are, so just keep that in mind. But always make sure that you're buying from a reputable supplier, that they label the seed correctly and that the seed is actually going to be clean. Those things will make sure you have no issues. And look, honestly, don't go importing things that you're not supposed to. There's a reason they're not allowed. Whether you agree with it or not is irrelevant. These measures are in place for a reason. But yeah, go ahead, check out what you can import and go for it. Alright, so that's the end of the direct questions. There are a few things that I get asked a lot, so I just consider them to be general questions, and that is, where do I buy my plants? I've already answered that question, so it's not one that we'll go over again. And what soil mix do I use? Now, I have actually done an entire video on the soil mix that I use. It's quite a long video, but I'm thinking what I'm likely to do is to do an abbreviated version of that in the near future, and just because I do get asked that a lot. I use 4 main mixes. One is for rot prone cactus, the other one is for your sort of general cactus, which are fairly easy going. The third one is for ones that like a lot of water, and then the 4th mix that I use is for the one that I use for seed raising. So that's basically the 4 mixes that I use. And for those of you that are on Patreon, I'll be putting up my soil mixes in written form, and just a few of my recommended ingredients as well. The other one that I get asked a lot is, what fertilizer do I use? I do fertilize my plants around once a year, and I use a couple of different products. What I would recommend, however, is if you're going to be fertilizing your cactus, which in all honesty is not necessary, you don't actually need to do it if your soil mix is right, is go for a fertilizer that is geared more towards flower and fruit, because it will have a lower nitrogen content, and you want to try and limit the amount of nitrogen that you're actually adding into or giving to your cactus, because it will lead to lush growth. And lush growth basically is when the plant becomes really like overly juicy green, I guess you could say. A lot of you will know that's a term that I use. And it increases their chance of rot, and also invites pests and whatnot in as well. So over on Patreon, I will be actually listing for my patrons the exact brands and amounts that I use, and also my method for fertilization as well. That won't be released on YouTube. So yeah, anyways, that's the end of the questions. Quite a long video, so hopefully you're still awake after all this. Yeah, so as always, if you have any questions, definitely do leave me a comment. I do try and reply as quickly as possible. And yeah, make sure you do check out my Patreon page. I will be using 100% of the proceeds for things directly for the channel. So if we get a couple of dollars come through, I'm going to go out and buy cactus seed, and then I'm going to go ahead, shoot a video and upload it so that you guys can see, because the reason that I started the Patreon is so that I can grow the channel and put more stuff out there for you. So if you have any requests for videos and things like that, I can definitely do that as well. But again, 100% of the proceeds will go directly towards cactus and cactus related things, so that we can keep growing the channel. I mean, I'm at well over 1,000 subscribers now, which is absolutely incredible. And who knows, in the future I might even start an Instagram or something like that. All right, everyone. Thanks for, I guess I couldn't say watching. Thanks for listening. And as always, happy gardening. Bye.